like to welcome you to another episode of Plain Spoken Grace. We're coming to you again from Columbia, Tennessee, and some interesting conversations with folks who are actually good friends. And so our guest today is Lenny LeBlanc. And so Lenny, I'd like to thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here, Chip.
It's good to see you in person. Been watching you on YouTube and trying to catch up with some of the things that happened in your career. So where are you originally from?
Well, I was born outside of Boston in a little town called Leominster, Massachusetts. And then we moved when I was 4 years old to Daytona Beach, Florida. So that's where I pretty much spent most of my youth, until I graduated high school. And I went on the road to seek my fortune.
There you go.
After that.
Do any surfing down in Daytona?
Oh, yeah, I was a surfer.
Yeah?
Yeah, and then one day I got sidetracked by music, and I sold my surfboard and bought a microphone.
Okay, so your first surfboard, what kind of board was it?
It was a Hanson.
Yeah?
A Hanson. It was 9.6, I think.
Yeah. That's pretty good. We had a conversation with a gentleman here yesterday that worked with a surfboard company, Smith Gordon.
Yeah.
They made some great longboards back in the day. He lived out in San Diego and worked with them for a while. So it's that's kind of fun.
Right. They were heavy boards.
They were heavy. They actually were part of the progression of moving away from the heavy boards.
Well, all the boards were heavy back then.
They were heavy.
We used to get up at 5 in the morning sometimes, and we lived on the mainland side, and we were about 2 blocks from the intercoastal waterway.
Yeah.
And it was about 3/4 of a mile wide at that point. And so we'd get up at 5 in the morning, paddle across that river.
No kidding.
And then walk about 10 blocks with those heavy boards to the beach, and we'd only have about 30 minutes to surf. And then we'd have to come back home and go to school. We were just eat up with it,
Yeah. I can remember my cousin grabbing the front of the board and me grabbing the back of the board just to get them down to the ocean front.
They were heavy.
And then only one of us could get on the board. So I shoved it off my cousin. He went surfing and whatever else. So it's all good. At what age did you pick up a musical instrument?
Well,
and how did you get introduced to it?
Yeah, it was really by accident. I'd been to the beach with my friend, and he had a car. And so we stopped off at his house before he took me home. And his little brother and several of his other buddies were sitting in their living room. And they had 3 electric guitars, and they were playing songs from the radio. House of the Rising Sun, I think, was one of them. And one of the Animals songs. And my friend and I were just loving listening to them, And they looked at my buddy and I, and they said, "Hey, why don't one of y'all come over here and sing?" And we looked at each other like, "You're joking, right? We're not singing. We're not singers. We're surfers."
That's right.
And so they kept playing, and finally I just went over there and picked up the sheet music. I knew the songs. They were on the radio, And so I started singing, and they looked at me really funny, and they said, "Wow, you sound really good." I said, "Really?" They said, "Yeah, let's put a band together and enter the talent show at junior high." I said, "Talent show? You think I've got talent?"
Yeah.
And they said, "Yeah." And so we entered the talent show, and I didn't know what I was getting myself into. There was about 300 people in that little cafeteria. And I was so petrified. I hadn't done anything in front of anybody before.
Yeah, right.
So I had my hands in my pockets and my back to the audience. And I was singing to the band, and we won. Then they got really excited. They said, "Oh, you need to get a bass." And I said, "What's a bass?"
Yeah.
So it's a big one with 4 strings, So I marched my little tail down to Ecker's drugstore and got myself a job washing dishes. And about 3 months later, I bought myself a Fender bass.
No kidding.
For $150.
I was going to ask. Yeah, $150, yeah.
It's 1965,
Yeah.
And about a year later, I was playing in clubs, making a living.
How about that?
Yeah,
You still have that Fender bass?
I wish I did.
I bet you do.
It was kind of a dud. It's the way, when I got it in the studio later on, it didn't really record well.
Yeah.
So I ended up selling it, but from a financial perspective, and it would have been a great thing to have today.
Yeah, it would. How many instruments do you have in your personal collection?
I have probably 5 or 6 guitars and a piano.
Yeah.
I had a big 7-foot grand piano, but I sold it when we built a new house. It was too big.
Right. Because you can build a room around a grand piano.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm not like an avid collector where I've got 35 guitars or anything.
Yeah, I know some people that do. And I didn't know if you...
I have a few pretty ones to look at that I don't take on the road, and then a few that are workhorses, that I use when I play.
So, self-taught?
Yeah, pretty much. I never had any lessons. I would just learn from other people, watching them. I tell people I couldn't read music, and if you put a gun to my head. But I understand enough theory to get me into trouble. I had 6 months of music theory in high school.
Yeah.
After I started playing, you know,
Right.
so I could understand what forms a chord and what intervals are and that sort of thing. But I can't read music.
No kidding.
But I understand the science of it.
How many folks do what you do that don't know how to read music?
A lot.
Okay.
You'd be surprised. Yeah, a lot.
And they don't want people to know who they are. That's
I
pretty-
wear it as a badge.
Yeah, yeah. So how old were you when you started playing in, you said playing in clubs and
I
doing
was
something?
15 when I entered that talent show, and I started playing clubs at about 16 and a half.
Yeah. So what did that mean in those days, playing in a club?
Well, it means
because I
you-
know things have changed.
Yeah, it means you were legally not supposed to be there.
Right,
for
right.
one thing.
Yeah.
I'd wait outside during the break.
Well, you know, it's funny. I heard we chatted with Don Moen, and he did an interview with Chester Thompson.
Right.
And Chester was telling stories about being underage. He could play the drums, but when it was time to take a break, he either had to go outside or go to the office.
Right.
Because he couldn't be in the club. He was underage.
Exactly.
So did you have some of those kind of things happen with you? Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you
we
were
had to
playing,
go out
they
in the alley during the break, you know. As
Yeah.
long as you're on stage, you're cool. But yeah. My dad would always say, you know, Lenny, you need to get a real job.
Right.
And then after a couple of years, I was making about as much as he'd make all week, and I was making about that much on the weekends, you know. He thought, well, there might be something to this music business after all, you know.
How about that? And so where when you were, you know, I mean, I know you said you were in Daytona. Was it down in Florida? Where you
Yeah, I
were
was in
doing
Florida where I was playing the clubs until I graduated high school. And I got an offer from a band in Cincinnati, and I moved up there to play in that band. And they had a regional record deal. We had a weird name. It was called Whale Feathers. It was like a psychedelic blues band.
Yeah.
It was just really strange time period in my life musically.
Yeah.
And, you know, we grew up in Daytona, and that's where the Allman Brothers grew up.
Right.
They spent their later years there as teenagers and went to high school there.
Yeah.
So I knew Dwayne and Greg. They were just a few years older than me, but we would hang out together, and Dwayne would come in and jam with my bands,
Yeah.
you know. And my friend Pete Carr, who's also a Daytonian, was in a band with the Allman Brothers called the Hourglass. It was the predecessor to the Allman Brothers.
Right.
So, and he played bass, but he was a guitar player. He was kind of like Dwayne's protege, you know. And so
Yeah.
after that band broke up, they were in California, did a couple records on Liberty label. They moved back to Florida. Dwayne spent a short time in Muscle Shoals as a session player, and then went to Jacksonville to form the Allman Brothers with Dickie Betts and Barry Oakley and the rest of them.
Right.
They had a band called The Second Coming, I think.
Right.
No, it wasn't Second Coming. I forget the name of their band, but anyway, that's where they formed the Allman Brothers. Pete moved back to Daytona, and Pete and I had a band, and so Dwayne would come in on the weekends and jam with us. And Dwayne was an amazing guy. He was had so much charisma that when he walked in a room, he was only about 5'8", short
Right.
little guy,
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
weighed 130 pounds.
Right.
When he walked in a room, every eye turned to him. Looked
How
at him.
about that?
When he got on stage, he was so good that he pulled everybody up three times their playing ability. He played 3 times better when he was on stage.
What is that?
He was just a born leader,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Life cut way too short,
Yeah.
but he was an amazing, amazing guy. So, yeah, had a kind of a cool atmosphere musically there
Yeah.
to learn in. You know,
So when you're that age and you're playing in those clubs and so forth, is it fun or is it work?
it's
or
fun.
Is it,
Are you
yeah.
kidding?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I
fun.
mean, I would think so. Yeah.
And the girls look at you.
Yeah. As long as you're not standing with your back to the crowd and your
Right,
hands in
right.
your pockets.
I finally learned to face people.
That's good. That's great.
Put my fears behind me.
That's great. So how long you do that before you just doing some of the things that made you a little more popular?
So when I was in Cincinnati, I didn't really fit with that band, and Greg Allman came to town after Dwayne had died, and the Allman Brothers were doing a concert there in Cincinnati, and I hung out with Greg afterwards, and he said, "You should move to Macon and be my bass player," because he had just done his solo record,
Yeah.
Laid Back,
Yeah.
and so I had a young wife and a young daughter, and we had a little camper trailer. We hauled our stuff down to Macon, and she was an LPN. She got a job at the hospital, and I was Mr. Mom.
Right.
And the funny thing is there's a house in Macon, Georgia. It's called the Big House. And it's the museum right now for the Allman Brothers. So I pull into town and I'm looking in the houses to rent or apartments to rent.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing I see. It doesn't say it's a big house, it just says it was like a half of a downstairs of a house.
Right.
Another guy rented the whole house and he was renting out portions of
Sure.
it. So I rent that downstairs not knowing that's where the Allman Brothers lived.
Is that
a few years before. That was their big house
Yeah.
where they all lived together.
Sure,
you know?
sure.
And so Greg would come get me. And the first time he came to get me, he walked in and he just looked around. And he said, "I'll wait for you in the car." I think it was a lot of memories
Sure.
from Dwayne being there
Yeah,
and stuff.
sure.
And so I stayed there probably 3 months, and he was not in a hurry to put a band together. I'd go to the studio and we jam. And finally I said, I gotta do something. So I called Pete Carr, who had kind of taken Dwayne's place as a session guy in Muscle Shoals.
Right.
And Pete was already kind of established. He was playing on a lot of big records. So I called Pete. I said, "Do you think there's anything for me in Muscle Shoals?" And he said, "Yeah. Why don't you come up and check it out?" So we came up for a week, went back and got our stuff. And oddly enough, 9 months later, Greg finally put his band together.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have lasted 9 months,
No, right,
and may not even have been in the band,
Sure.
in the long term. But
Sure.
Muscle Shoals was the best move I ever made. I moved there and literally stayed with Pete for 6 months. He housed me and fed me because I didn't have a job, and my wife had a job. She went to work as a veterinarian's assistant, but we didn't have enough money to survive on. So,
Sure.
And then finally, I was able to get a job in one of the clubs at the state line because our county was dry.
Right.
And they had these little clubs at the state line of Tennessee, and so I went up there and got a job there.
Yeah.
And eventually started playing sessions. Somebody eventually.
Yeah. So Muscle Shoals, there are a lot of people that aren't that familiar with the rich music history down there. What was it like back then?
It was just like the Wild West. I mean, there was 9 studios there. And, 1 week the Rolling Stones might be there, and the next week Sonny and Cher would be there. The next week Linda Ronstadt would be there.
Right.
The next week it would be, Simon and Garfunkel.
Right.
Or Bob Seger. It was like week after week after week. Sometimes there'd be 2 major artists because there was 9 studios. There'd be maybe 3 major acts in town.
Yeah.
Recording, and then at one time per capita there was more hit records cut in Muscle Shoals than anywhere in the world.
Right. No, that's exactly right.
In the city limits, they had signs: Muscle Shoals, the hit recording capital of the world.
Right. Right.
But
what was it about that area that what was the magic of it?
I think it was. There was a couple rhythm sections there and there was an attitude there that, unlike a lot of the big studio and music centers. They were pretty much on the clock, in the big cities, to where your session was 3 hours, and it was kind of a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. You come in, we play for you 3 hours. We're not really into your stuff, but we're kind of a machine. And Muscle Shoals, it was more of a homegrown atmosphere. They weren't on the clock so much.
Yeah, so let's stay until we get it right.
Stay until we get it right.
Yeah.
They could be there and relax and go to the restaurants. Nobody would hassle them. Nobody even knew who they were.
Sure.
Mick Jagger could walk down the street and nobody knew who he was. So, and it was just and kind of a particular unique sound grew out of that. It was real organic. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't slick, but it was just real rootsy and a lot of bottom end kick, drum, and bass. And I think artists were just drawn to that.
Sure.
And so it just became this thing, this little recording empire,
Right.
in the middle of nowhere.
Did it elevate your game?
Oh, gave me huge opportunities that I never dreamed I'd have. I was playing on, hit records as a bass player and singing on major background vocals on major records like Mac Davis records and those kind of things, Dobie Gray and all these artists that would come through, I'd sing backgrounds. Roy Orbison came to town and I got to hang out with Roy Orbison for like 3 days.
Right.
He ended up cutting one of my songs, and I got to sing backgrounds with him at the studio,
Yeah.
I'm like standing there, I was across the street, I said, "That's Roy Orbison." What am I doing here,
Yeah.
But, I had a lot of great opportunities. But I was there about a year, and I always wanted to be a songwriter. I wanted to be an artist, and so I started meeting a lot of great songwriters that were there in town. People like Eddie Struzik and Ava Aldrich and Walt Aldrich and Mac McAnally came to town about 2 years after I did, Mac did. And so we would all work together on each other's records and write together. And so I demoed a few songs with Pete. He said, we'll send these to Jerry Wexler. Well, Jerry Wexler was the founder of Atlantic Records, him and Ahmet Ertegun. And Jerry was responsible for bringing all the big acts down, like Aretha and Wilson Pickett. Right. Initially, he was the one that kind of helped put us on the map.
Right.
And so he sent my demos to Jerry, and I had a record deal 3 weeks later as a solo artist.
Yeah.
You know, and it was like...
How old were you then?
I was 25, maybe.
Okay.
24, 25.
Yeah. So at what point does that start working on you? I mean, you're 25, then all of a sudden you start thinking...
Yeah, it's like, and I see Billboard magazine, and there's me on the front page at the bottom third of the page, an ad for my record. I'm thinking, whoa. Yeah. And that record kind of opened some doors for me. Didn't have any big hits, had some top 50 hits on it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a door opener. And then Pete Carr at the same time was doing records for Atlantic, instrumental guitar records. Mm-hmm. Because he's an amazing guitar player. Right. So he was doing kind of pop, blues, fusion records. And so Doug Morris, who's probably the most powerful man in the music industry today, was running Big Tree Atlantic at that time, the label that we were on. So they said, why don't you guys team up together, you know, because Hall & Oates were big and Loggins and Messina. Duos were pretty big and popular back then. So we teamed up and did a LeBlanc and Carr album. Right. And we had one single, the Four Tops cover, Something About You, that went top 40. Right. And then we went on American Bandstand, Pete and I. Yeah. And we sang that one, and then we sang Falling. And then not too long after that, they released Falling as a single, and it was a huge, just huge hit. Right. Yeah. All right, so I'm old enough to remember American Bandstand. Right. You know, what's that like for a young musician to go on American Bandstand and be there with Dick Clark? It's a little bit teeny bopperish, kinda, you know? Yeah. Because you don't get to play live. Right. They've got these big custom amps behind you, but you're not plugged into them. Right. And so you're lip syncing. So it's kind of goofy that way, but it's Bandstand. I mean, come on, it's Dick Clark. Sure. You know, I've got my picture with Dick Clark. Yeah. I mean, I've seen the picture. Yeah. You know, Johnny Rivers was there with us that day. Right. He was the other guest, you know, and so it's like, oh my gosh, you know. Was that up in New York? It was in L.A. Okay, in L.A. All right. Yeah, we pull up the airport and a limo picks us up. Uh-huh. You know, and we're like, oh, so this is how it's done, you know? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was pretty wild. Right. And after that, I couldn't even go to the show at home. It was like we were stars. Right. Just from that one show. You know? Sure. I'd go to the mall and people would be, you know, chasing me and stuff. It was like, well, you're weird, you know, it's crazy. Yeah. They didn't even know who you were, and then all of a sudden... They knew who I was then. It's amazing how that kind of can have an impact on... So again, okay, you're a young guy. Right. What's this doing to your personal life and your ego and a lot of these other things? I'm a pretty level-headed guy, so it didn't really get to me that much. I mean, you know, because it wasn't that it happened overnight. Yeah. It was right. Definitely not an overnight success. So I appreciated it, you know, and probably not as much as I should have, but I did appreciate it. And hopefully I was somewhat level-headed. But so then you have a big hit single like that, you got to go on the road. Right. And so we got a manager, an English guy named Peter Rudge. And he managed the Stones. He managed Leonard Skinner. Yeah. 38 Special. Right. And us. We were like his tax write-off. I was going to say. So he'd get around to you all after he was finished with the other work. Because of that, we got put on the Skinner tour. We were the opening act for the Skinner tour where the plane crashed. Wow. And so... We started out in Statesboro, Georgia, at a college there. And then the second date was in the Miami Sportatorium. The third concert was in Tampa Bay Civic Center. Fourth concert was in Lakeland Civic Center. And then we split up for a day. And Pete and I went to Daytona to headline our own show. They went to North Carolina or South Carolina one. And the day after that, we were scheduled to meet back up in Baton Rouge and continue the tour. We had 27 shows booked. Right. And that's when the plane crashed on the way to Baton Rouge. Yeah, and we didn't know till we got to the hotel that night. We hadn't had the radio on. Yeah, sure. We were writing songs in the car. The way you get news those days is something different than it is today. Sure. Yeah. And so, it was pretty much of a big shock when we got there, and So we had nothing after that. We had like a month
Sure.
or 6 weeks with nothing, and my manager was he was all tore up because he leased that plane for them, and he felt like he was responsible. The plane was actually due for maintenance in Baton Rouge because it was running really bad. And we were, Ronnie Van Sant and the other guys were asking Pete and I if we wanted to fly with them because they had 2 empty seats on the plane.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have been on that flight, but we felt like our band would feel slighted if we were flying, and the rest of them were driving. So we we declined, but really sad day. So after about 6 weeks, we got booked on a bunch of different tours. We were on Journey, about 5 or 6 dates with Journey, a ton of dates with England Dan and John Ford Coley. Got to do a weekend with Taj Mahal, one of my favorite all-time artists in Boston. Some Foreigner dates. Gosh, Jay Giles, just all these different artists. And we had 2.5 months worth of shows booked. We had 56 shows. No, we did 2.5 months, 56 shows in 2.5 months. We were driving. We didn't have a bus.
Right.
We were flying. We had 2 Bonnevilles. We called one the smoking limo and non-smoking limo.
That's good.
But 3 days before the tour started, Pete decided he didn't want to go on the tour.
Really?
3 days before the tour started. He's just a really creative type guy, and he wanted to produce. He struggled with it, and I guess at the end he finally said, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
And so I had 3 days to find a guitar player. Found a little guy there in Muscle Shoals named Leon Sherrill. And Leon stepped up and learned all those songs in 3 days.
No kidding.
And did an incredible job. But it was a bit weird when I do TV because, Bandstand was the only show that we did together, Pete and I. So then I got booked in the Midnight Special, got booked on Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, and Soundstage in Chicago. And I remember Dinah Shore coming up to me and interviewing me, and she was looking around and she said, well, whose car? So I said, oh, he's the creative type, he's like the mad scientist in the studio,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, that's all
I
right.
didn't care,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's Taj Mahal. You said something about that.
Oh, love Taj Mahal.
So elaborate on that a little bit.
When I was growing up, all I had was blues records.
Yeah.
And R&B records. I had Taj Mahal, Paul Butterfield Blues Band, John Mayall. That's all I had was, blues records. And so Taj Mahal was one of my favorites.
Right.
Natural Blues was the second one. The first one was him, just Taj Mahal. So, and I knew every song on those records.
Right.
And that's oddly enough where Dwayne learned how to play slide guitar. Was listening to Jesse Ed Davis on the Taj Mahal records, doing Statesboro Blues.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to hear about some of those folks,
Oh, yeah.
and you're rattling through those names like the guys who listen to the guys they played on the Little League baseball team with, but
Right.
this is all part of your story and your career, which is fun to listen to and so forth. So your career is, you're kind of moving along in this career, in this business or whatever else, but there's more to the story, and there's more to what's going on with, in your own personal life.
I changed labels after that LeBlanc and Carr record because there was no LeBlanc and Carr again, and so I eventually was able to get out of my record deal at Atlantic and signed with Capitol Records.
You say get out of your deal. What's it take to do that?
Well, money.
Okay.
Yeah, it takes money.
Yeah.
But eventually they let me out, and I had a drug smuggler friend in Daytona that gave me $10,000 in a paper bag, cash, and I went and bought my contracts.
Wow.
It sounds like a mob story, doesn't it?
Yeah. But how much you have to pay him back? No, I'm just kidding.
I signed a deal with Capitol the next week and got a $10,000 advance.
There you go.
Paid him back. Yeah.
Okay.
So, so I switched to Capitol Records. This was a 2-year period it took to get all this to transpire, to get someone interested to buy my contract.
Right.
So I was 2 years with nothing, couldn't do anything pretty much musically. That was tough.
I bet.
So then I did one record for Capitol. We had one single that I think went to top 40. Wasn't a great success, but they signed me for a second album. Usually have a 2-year, a 2-record deal on most of those record deals, and they renewed the option. And it was with the Swampers. They had their own label in Muscle Shoals. It was MSS Capitol, distributed by Capitol. So I was on that label. It was me, Levon Helm, Russell Smith of the Amazing Rhythm Aces, and I think one other artist, maybe Bonnie Bramlett, maybe, or something. I can't remember who the fourth artist was. 4 of us, anyway. So I did that record and was trying to write the songs for the second record. And that same smuggler friend that gave me the drug money to get out of my record deal called me late one night. He said, Lenny, I got saved and I'm going to heaven. I want you to be there with me. Are you saved? I thought, man, just when things were going good.
Wow.
I was not looking for God. I mean, God was the last thing on my radar. I had a record deal, I had, hit songs, I was making a good living, had a writer's deal tied to the record deal. I was on a draw and living a good life, you know. Left my young family 6 years before for my career. My career was my God.
Right.
Living with a lot of guilt from that, but my selfishness kind of outweighed the guilt.
Yeah.
In some ways, but so my buddy said, I want to send you a book. And so one of the books was the Bible. Another book he sent me was this little paperback, and it was about the end times, the story of Revelation.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. That scared
That'll put it on you.
That scared the crap out of me, that little book right there.
Yeah.
But it was the Bible that really spoke to me. I started reading in the New Testament. That's where he told me to start reading. I'd never read the Bible. And I started reading about the rich young ruler, how he had all this stuff, but he was bankrupt inside. And his stuff was his God, and he couldn't let go of it.
Was that resonant? So it resonated with you?
Oh, yeah. I saw myself as him. I saw myself as the woman at the well. Even though I was a man, I'd had many relationships. I thought if I could find the right person to share all this with, then I'd be fulfilled, and it never happened.
Right.
And then God just began to show me how bankrupt I was and how shallow my life was.
Interesting.
Yeah, I began to feel his love for the first time. He just began to reveal himself to me right there in my house. This kind of went over a period of about a month, all this transpired. And I had a roommate, and he thought I was losing my mind.
Oh, yeah.
My friend Eddie Struzik that wrote Falling with me.
Yeah.
And I was trying to write these pop songs, and so I start writing it to be a pop song, and by the time we get to the chorus, it'd be about Jesus. And I thought, man, Capitol Records is not going to want these Jesus songs. And they didn't.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that now you're a Jesus boy, and now you can't do these pop songs anymore. That's not holy. You got to do these Christian songs. I didn't even know what Christian music was.
Yeah, I understand.
I had no idea what it even existed. And but I lost the desire to write those songs. I wanted to write about this God that changed my life. And so, because I was wrecked in my house. I mean, I'd be going through the house, and the next thing I'd be on the floor like a 4-year-old kid just crying, asking God's forgiveness for something I remember that I did. I'd go out on the front porch, and I'd look across the street, and the trees, I swear those trees have never looked that green.
Yeah.
And my heart began to change inside out.
Yeah.
I just became a new man.
Right.
A different man.
Right.
And my friends all thought I was crazy. They thought, man, you're giving up. When I told my manager in LA, I said, you think they'd let me out of my record deal? He said, what?
Yeah.
How many people would love to be where you're at?
Right.
And have what you have? And I said, I know, I understand that, but all I can say is I just don't have a desire to do it anymore. And so I went another 2 years.
Right.
Couldn't do anything because Capitol held me in suspension. And they wanted $30,000 for my contracts. Finally, after 2 years, I hooked up with a little guy in Altamont Springs, Florida, named John Phelps, who had a little small recording school called Full Sail that's now 12,000 students on campus and 12,000 online.
Sure is.
It's huge.
Yeah.
But back then, John didn't have a studio, but he had this little record company he started, and he had distribution from Columbia Records.
Right.
And so eventually, after 2 years, Capitol realized no one was going to pay big dollars for my contract. So they let me out on a 5% override if I ever sold over 30,000 records, they would get 5%, which I never sold over 30,000 records. I don't think I ever sold over 3,000 records. I was not a big selling artist. My songs would go great.
Sure.
But
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, I did 2 records with John, and we are still just the best of friends after 30-something years, you know. He was a big part of my start. And so, yeah, you know, I started doing Christian music. All I knew about Christian music was Amy Grant.
Right. Well,
because a year before I came to Christ, I sang on Amy's first record.
Right.
My record called My Father's Eyes, I think it was called.
Right.
And I just did it as a favor to another friend of mine that grew up with her. And I think it took us all night in the studio. She was like 17 years old.
Right.
And I remember seeing her later, about 8 months later, on a Billy Graham crusade. I said, oh, there's that little girl.
Yeah.
You know, and I knew that those songs were different when I was listening to them in the headphones, you know, singing on them. I thought, these are different songs, but they're about God, you know.
Yeah.
And no doubt that I think the Lord probably used those as seeds in my life.
Yeah.
Me not even really realizing it.
Shoals Coffee Co. Coffee Roasters is passionate about 2 things, people and coffee, because we want to ensure that both reach their full potential. We do our part to improve lives by purchasing coffee beans from women-owned farms in Guatemala and Colombia, along with other sources to bring you the fresh taste and quality product you deserve, while also ensuring that workers are paid fairly and treated well throughout the growing process. 100% of the profit from the sale of Shoals Coffee Co. products is poured directly back into bettering the lives of mothers and babies in communities across the U.S., as well as in the lives of women and children in the countries where we purchase our beans. Our products are available for purchase online at shoalscoffeeco.com and will be delivered right to your door. So buy Shoals Coffee Co. and enjoy your coffee even more, knowing that your purchase is providing for the needs of women and children today, while also impacting lives for generations to come. Shoals Coffee Co. is owned and operated by Shoals Save a Life Incorporated, a pregnancy resource center in North Alabama, and we are proud to be a sponsor of Plain Spoken Grace podcast.
Well, you know what's interesting when I hear your story, because as we're talking to men, and that's really what this, you know, Plain Spoken Grace is about. We're having conversation with Christian men about their with biblical worldviews and how they're serving God. But it's amazing how many stories I've heard of guys who were successful. Who have had success or had it in the way that the world would term it as successful, and yet there was this emptiness. And probably harder for people with success to realize that, because you got all the things that you think you should be doing and have in your life and so forth, so it's easier to mask it, so to speak. But then to also hear about those moments when they finally get down on their knees and surrender. And then what happens from the, as you said, from the inside out. It's, and you know, hard sometimes for me to speak about faith in a way other than how I know it impacted my own personal life.
But that's the most powerful.
Agreed. You can speak about that with passion, and you fully understand it. You remember what it was like before.
I can listen to 100 sermons and get inspired, sure. But when I hear somebody's personal story, like your story, or, you know, anyone's story about how they came to Jesus, it's just powerful.
It is powerful.
Yeah.
And it's also amazing that a couple things happened as well. You got friends or other people around you that think, what's going on?
Right. But now all those friends from back then, I've preached some of them's funeral. And I've been their counselor. And I've led some of them to Jesus.
The other part of that is you know, you've got the, as we said, we feel it, we experience it, the pruning. There's pruning that takes place. Because what you had, I know what I had in my life. Nor did I. I know what I had in my life on the front end of that, and then when all of a sudden I made that commitment, you know, things were being pulled away from my life in some pretty painful ways. But it was bringing me back down to building that proper foundation, which is never perfect
Right.
for any of us.
Nope.
We're going to all have our challenges. There are going to be times when we're going to fall or whatever else. We got to get up, dust ourselves off. And
Right.
so that's what, as men, we're talking about how that has impacted, happened in our own personal lives.
Yeah, it was rough for me the first 5 or 6 years because all of a sudden I didn't get invited to all the shows in town. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't get invited to sit in on certain things or write with certain people that I was writing with before, and kind of a little bit of ostracization there. You know, for about the first 5 or 6 years.
Right.
And then I was in LAX airport. I was singing at a church out in LA, and I saw these musicians, and I got kind of started having a pity party. And I was like, God, I could be doing that. All my friends are having all this success, and I'm struggling in Christian music, you know, every year and paying my bills, but not really, you know, progressing any. And I'm telling you what, it wasn't a month later that a country band recorded one of my songs that I wrote for my wife called Treat Her Right, and had a #1 single in country radio. I was like, oh, okay, God. Maybe I ought to complain a little more. No. No. Right. But it was almost like saying, okay, watch what I can do without you, you know, getting your hands in it.
How about that?
And having a pity party about it.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I've had so much opportunity,
Right.
Chip, along the way that I never asked for, never dreamed I would get. And just amazing.
It's hard that's another thing that's hard to explain to somebody who's not a believer.
Yeah.
It's amazing when you let go
Yeah.
and you trust, because you sometimes don't even know. I mean, if you knew, then you might not follow that path. But when you don't know and you have that trust, and then all of a sudden, like you said, the phone rings or an opportunity presents itself and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got a few songs that have made their way around the world, that are sung in dozens of nations and translated into dozens of languages. And on the financial end of it, one song has made more. A little Christian worship song called Above All has made more than all my country, pop, Christian songs together.
Right.
And is still being recorded and used on over 3,000 pieces of products.
Right.
It's like, I couldn't have made that happen.
No.
I had no idea that would happen.
No.
You know.
So talk a little bit more about the transition, and I would also say the progression of I guess we call it Christian music, but what how that's changed and how in the church and what know.
Well, I didn't know from a Baptist from a Methodist when I got saved.
Yeah.
I hadn't been to a church in 20 years, and so I started going to this little country church with my wife because her mom went there. They were having a Sunday school drive, and so she invited me, us. So we went there. We went there for about a year, and then we changed and went to another smaller church, 300 people. Well, the piano player quit. She said, Lenny, would you play piano? And I had a piano in my bedroom, but I really wasn't a piano player.
Yeah.
And without even thinking about it, I said, sure, I'll play.
Yeah.
And thank goodness they were playing hymns and just real simple choruses, you know. So like 3 chords, so I could fake my way through it.
Yeah.
But during that time, I started getting a real desire, because I really had a burden for my friends in the industry and just my friends in town there, because I wanted them to know Christ. You know, I wanted them to know the peace that I had for the first time. And so I said, but they're not going to relate to this music. They're just not going to get it, you know, because I didn't get it. And
Right.
I said, there's got to be music that can relate to my generation. So that's where my desire to write worship songs was born, out of the need in my own church. And it was really myself, Don Moen, and a few others. We were kind of the pioneers of that modern worship era.
So you use the term worship songs. What does that mean to you when you say that?
A praise song is like when you sing about God.
Okay.
And a worship song is when you sing to God.
Okay.
From your, it's a personal thing.
Right.
Yeah, other people are singing it, but it's your song.
Right.
That worship song, even though you didn't write it, it becomes your song. It becomes your path to connect to God. Sometimes I liken worship songs to like little cars you get in, and you travel to God in that car. It's like a transport, a way to transport you and make a connection to God.
Right.
Through music.
Right. and people connect in
and say
special.
the things you want to say, but you don't know how to say them necessarily in a song.
Right,
You know.
right, and you just kind of let yourself go in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you make that personal connection. You know.
When you're performing, I use the word performing. I guess in church you probably shouldn't use the word performing.
Well,
but there are a lot of people performing in church.
Yeah, there is a certain aspect of it. You know, that
Yeah.
is a performance. I mean, it's just natural. You know, you're singing it, and that's always a struggle. I think for worship leaders is not not worrying so much about whether people are liking it or whether they're necessarily singing. You make your connection. Hopefully, they will follow you. You know, and you'll lead them there. But you can't make them go there,
Right.
you know. And yeah, it's part of you is concentrating on the lyrics. You're thinking, okay, what's coming next in this arrangement?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like two brains going on, you
Yeah.
know. And then you're trying to.
Can
in
you
your
let
heart-
yourself go sometimes when you're doing praise?
Yeah, especially if
Or
it's a
worship,
song
I should say.
especially if it's a song that you just kind of know like the back of your hand that you've sung
Right.
all your life. It's
Right.
easy then, but if you're doing a new song or one you're not so familiar with, it's a lot you're kind of paying attention to besides your personal connection to God.
I've been in environments before where that happens, where you just
Yeah.
it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen frequently enough.
Yeah, not enough.
No, it doesn't happen frequently enough.
In the old days, it could happen more because we weren't on the clock and we weren't so produced,
Right.
and it was more room for kind of drifting and
Talk about that. So produced. I get a sense
Yeah.
when I go to church these days, depending on the church I go to, especially in some of these bigger churches, where I hate to say it, but it's almost overproduced.
yeah. I think the church as a whole has felt the pressure to compete with the world for people's attention.
Yeah.
I think that's what drives a lot of it, and they can mask it as we want to do things with excellence. But I think to a certain extent, you've got to follow the Spirit of God more than the spirit of the world. And I think
So what's your advice to a church to go there?
well, not to rely so heavily on technology. Use it
Okay.
as a tool, but don't use it as a crutch.
Okay. That's interesting. Use it as a tool, but not as a crutch.
Right.
Yeah.
Because what happens, for so long, like I remember in the 80s and 90s thinking, these people that come here on Sunday morning, they've sung these songs week after week after week after week, year after year after year, but they're still looking at the screen. But they can get in their cars and they can turn on the radio and they can sing every song on the radio without no screen.
Yeah.
What happens if the screen breaks?
Right.
Oh my gosh, we're so dependent on it, see?
Right. Yeah.
And that's the way technology can be, Sometimes at church we use these stems, they're called, and they're additional tracks that you're hearing in your phones, and there's a click track, and you're all staying with that click. So the other stuff that's on a disc, you'll be synced with it. Well, the audience doesn't hear that click, but they hear the other instruments that you're not playing. And you get to where you're just relying on that stuff, Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll pray, I hope those stems crash this morning. Just so we can be a real band, what I mean?
Yeah. No, I can understand that. And it is interesting that you say that. But how about the way it connects to Scripture? I mean, it's got to do that too. The music.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the foundation of it all.
I was going to say, because when your friend gave you a Bible, it made a difference in your life.
And I think there's some incredible new songs being birthed, being written by a lot of these young writers. And there's a lot of fluff out there, it's just not really that great.
Yeah.
But, I sure don't want to discount what's going on because there's some great stuff
Yeah.
coming out of this next generation.
That's good.
Yeah.
Younger?
Younger.
Yeah. How much younger is the next generation for two guys in their 60s?
Anybody under 70 is young for me. I'll be 70 in June.
There
So.
you go. So, that's pretty good. That means Don's not young.
No, he's older than me.
Yeah,
I remind him he's a year older all the time.
How about that? That's great. So, your career. I mean, what's going on with your music? I know you're doing some stuff with architecture.
Well, before this COVID thing happened, in the fall of 19, I had a Nigerian tour booked with just me. And every time I think about that tour, I just get a sinking feeling in my stomach. I was just, oh. And like I said, it was before this pandemic hit or anything like that. And I just told Sherry, I said, you know what? I've flown over 3 million air miles. I've been in over 25 countries. I said, I think this season of my life is coming to an end.
Huh.
And so I called my friend in Nigeria, and I canceled the tour. It was going to be in March 2020, oddly enough.
Right.
Which wouldn't have been a good time to go.
No.
And yeah, so I just decided that I was going to not do any more international travel. Don didn't like to hear that.
Yeah.
He didn't want to hear any part of that.
No.
But I said, I'll still do some U.S. stuff, by myself or with you,
Yeah.
We did a 10-day tour. We raised a bunch of money for an orphanage that he supports in Ghana.
Uh-huh.
And I love doing stuff like that. I love doing songwriter nights. I'll get invited, because I've had success in the country, pop, and Christian realms, I'll get invited to do songwriter nights where there might be 3 country writers, or 1 pop writer and 2 country, and then me.
Yeah.
It's kind of a hybrid. And it's in a theater. Might be 300-400 people there.
Yeah.
I'll share my pop songs, my country songs, and then I'll just do a 30-second little testimony.
Right. Right.
30 years ago, I had a life change, and I started writing songs about God.
Right.
And I'll play Above All. It was like, I played it in a room full of drunks, and it just sobered up the whole room in like 30 seconds. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
And then people will come back to the CD table, afterwards, and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, what was that song you played? I started crying."
No kidding.
And it was the Holy Spirit just touching them, So
Yeah.
I love doing things like that, because I'll never reach those people in the church.
One of the things we talked about, we did this interview yesterday with a gentleman, Scott Lehman,
Yeah.
with a ministry called In His Grip,
Yeah.
reaching out to golfers.
Right.
Guys that you'll reach on a golf course, you won't reach in church. Opie Thomas, we did an interview with him, Hope Outdoors.
Yeah.
He's got hunters and fishermen who he's ministering to in some pretty powerful ways. That would come by his sporting goods stop when he was part of the owners there, or do a hunt or whatever with them. Would never find him in the church. But it's amazing, and it's beautiful to see how each of us is touching folks in those parts and those walks of our lives.
And those events, they'll promote them weeks ahead, and I'll get an interview set up with a country station in the city.
Yeah.
Or another or 2 country stations.
Right.
I'll do my interview, and they'll say, so what made you make the transition into like gospel music? Funny you should ask.
Glad you did.
So it's a wide open door.
Right.
And I'm sharing my story on this country radio station, and I got it down to where I can share it in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Good. So I'll give them the 2-minute version. Or the 1-minute version.
Yeah.
I can do it in 30 seconds even,
Yeah.
So, and so, so you're asking about the transition into architecture.
Yeah. Obviously you're not traveling internationally. No. We all do get to a point in our careers or our lives where, next year, for me, I will have been doing the business I've been in for 40 years. And so, at what point do you say, all right, Lord, let's move on to the next season? Yeah. And of course, I hope this Plain Spoken Grace gig that we got going is going to be part of it.
Hopefully.
But yeah. If the Lord
I might hold you down a little bit.
No, you're not going to at all.
See, every ministry needs a write-off.
Well, you were the 4th act when you were talking about your manager. You were the tax write-off for the year.
I was. Every record label I've been on, I've been the tax write-off.
No, come on now. Come on now.
When I was at Integrity, I'd tell them, I'd say, Lenny's record's coming out, and they'd send out a memo, no job is safe. All the lights would dim,
Yeah, come on now.
But, back in high school, before I got distracted by music, they'd have job fairs,
Yeah.
And I was drawn to architecture.
Interesting.
And I loved building stuff. And through my life, I've built furniture, and I built every house we've been in and designed them all. And so this last house we built 2 years ago in July, I learned all the 3D CAD architectural software. It took me about 2 years to learn it. It's pretty heavy duty stuff.
Yeah.
I'm still learning, but so I did a few floor plans for friends, after we moved in. And then I got approached by a young builder that's in Florence there, High Cotton Homes. His name is Will King. He was Builder of the Year last year, and he's president of the Home Builders Association there, a great builder, really into the science of building. And so I hooked up with him, and I did 17 houses last year.
Right.
And I'm doing 4 right now, with more in the rings coming up.
Yeah.
And I just love it. And I think it was a good distraction for me and a good change of pace. Not many people have changed their careers at 69. Probably not a great career move, but it worked out pretty good, you know. But
well, here's the other hard part. If you're a creative person, I don't know that you ever turn it off.
No, you don't. And to me, it's just another stream of creativity that you go down.
Right.
And I almost this sounds kind of prideful, but I got tired of music. I did it for so long.
No, I understand.
I wanted to do something different.
Right.
You know, and I still love playing. And every time I play now, I don't play that much. So every time I do, I have to put super glue on my fingertips because I don't have any calluses anymore.
Right.
And it's like, I got to start playing a little bit more. You know?
Well, you got to toughen. Maybe you need to hit those keys a little harder when you're doing that doing your CAD stuff. That's great. Well, I think it's fun to listen to you recount your musical career.
Yeah.
It's fun to see what you're doing now with your architectural work and so forth. But it's absolutely beautiful to hear your story about how your relationship with Jesus Christ impacted and made a difference in your life.
I'm just impersonating an architect. I'm not an architect.
That's okay.
I got a business license, but no degree.
Yeah, but you're having some fun with it. So congrats
on
on that. And, that good work will draw more people to you.
Hopefully.
So thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it. It's great visiting with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. God bless.